So we're going to focus a little bit on the commercial aspects in this next section. And since the start of the recession, about 40% of all advertising spend has declined and has been cut from budgets out there. And as we all are too aware today, and I've lost count of you many times, the amount of times people have mentioned Q1 to me already today, that spend is not coming back anytime soon. So there's a very difficult commercial reality facing radio at the moment. It's an extremely competitive environment. Supply definitely outweighs demand at the moment. All of the media are competing as hard as they can, undercutting each other and trading as hard as they can to try and hold on to their share of that pie. And that pie is getting smaller every day as digital takes bigger and bigger chunks from it. But it's also a challenge to try and remain relevant to audiences and to hold on to your audience. How do you hold on to the listeners you have today? And how do you attract new listeners and younger listeners tomorrow? And we talked about how fickle and how mercurial that audience are. So how do we bring them in? So this session is going to look at the commercial side of things. We're going to look at how we can hold on to revenue and maybe how we can grow that revenue. We're going to see what reasons we can give to the industry to convince people to spend more money with radio. So the speakers on the panel today, and I'd like to invite them now if they're here to come up and join the panel, represent various different areas of the radio industry, from those that research radio, to those that promote radio, to those like myself who make decisions about investment in radio. And we also have someone from a print and digital perspective to give a different perspective today. And our aim today is to try and cover a number of different angles and hopefully to give you all some practical steps that you can take and implement in your stations to make that trading environment a little bit easier when you go back to your jobs this afternoon and tomorrow. So I'm going to get things started. My name is Michael Clancy. I'm the Deputy Managing Director of MediaVest. We're part of Core Media, one of the largest buyers of radio and the largest buyers of media in Ireland. And I'm going to start the session by giving an agency perspective on what radio can do to survive and hopefully flourish in this new digital world. And I'm going to give you 3 bits of information to take away today. The first of which are going to be our predictions on media investment. So how are spends with radio going to hold up versus other media and versus big bad digital. Secondly, we're going to give you our view in MediaVest about how technology is going to impact listeners, today's listeners and also tomorrow's listeners. And lastly, we're going to give some thoughts on the future. How can we get along? Is it possible for us to survive in this new digital world? Before I get started, I just thought I would share an experience with you. Now, I don't have a story about the Dubliners, but I do have a story about a meeting I was in last week with one of my clients. I think it sums up what's happening at the moment in the industry, the picture that we see, and I think it's relevant to what we're talking about today. So the meeting I was in, we were talking with a large client of ours, discussing their biggest campaign of the year, spend of about 1.2 million that was coming up. Here was the agenda for that meeting. So we started with a market overview for 5 minutes, competitive overview for 5 minutes. Then we went into our recommendations on TV, radio, and outdoor for a whopping 10 minutes. Then we got to online. And you can see 30 minutes devoted to that in the meeting. And we finished off with the boring bit, the media plan at the end. Now, in that meeting, we had 12 people, 7 of which were digital specialists, 5 from the agency and 2 from the client. So what is it that took up 60% of the agenda and had 7 people in the room, but only took up 40% of the spend? So I'm going to leave you with that for the moment and come back and answer that at the end, and I think the answer might surprise you a little bit. But to start on the first thing I want to talk to you about, which is our view on investments and spends. And just to make it very simple, forget about the chart for the moment. In 2 years' time, digital will be the largest medium in Ireland in terms of spends. That fight is over. That has definitely happened. Where is that money going to come from? Well, first and foremost, it's going to come from print. It's going to come from television. At best, we see outdoor remaining flat. But if you look at radio, maybe the picture isn't as bad as we might think. We are predicting very small but modest growth for radio when we look at the environment at the moment. But charts like this are kind of dangerous, because what we don't want to fall into the trap is saying, well, how can we steal share back from digital? How can we get some of that money back? That's not going to happen. If we're looking for share, the best place to look for share is from the other media. But what we really need to be thinking about and talking about is what a lot of speakers have touched on today, how we can make digital work for us, how we can grow our revenue with digital. So we've touched on this a little bit as well today. We remember this device. And when it came out, people said, well, it was going to dramatically affect radio listenership levels. White headphones, no one's going to listen to radio anymore. It's not going to happen, radio's dead. And we're hearing some of the same things being said about the likes of music streaming and Spotify. And those predictions weren't true about the iPod, and they're certainly not true about music streaming either. However, stuff like Spotify does represent a very robust challenge for listeners, and to radio, for listeners, and for the listeners of today and tomorrow. Your iPod was limited to the amount of music you had on your particular device. There's no limit to the likes of those streaming services. They connect you with all of the music everywhere. And in fact, what do they do? Who do they mimic? They try and be radio stations. They try and listen. They try and learn, and they adapt their preferences to you. So they're suggesting new music to you, music you haven't heard, but that they already know that you're going to like. And that is a very seductive and potent offering to listeners out there, and one that people are paying attention to. In the US, Pandora is the largest such provider. It has 70 million actives, that's million active users, and an 8% share of the radio market already. And that's people listening every week. And it is in growth. We don't see those figures in the JNLR, we do see them in music streaming. In Ireland, Spotify, while only around for a couple of months, already has established a firm foothold. The latest stats as of this month, 95,000 active users. That's every week, with a target of 140,000 by the end of the year. And again, in dramatic growth. So we want to try and understand a little bit more what effect this is going to have on the potential radio listeners out there to all of your stations. So we commissioned some research into radio listenership in Ireland, asking listeners specifically, why do they listen to radio? Is it for news? Is it for debate? Is it local issues? Is it music? Is it sport? Is it those high-paid DJs and RTE that were referred to early on in the presentation? Well, 18.2% listen purely to music. So that's a fifth of all listeners nearly. So, glass half empty, that means a fifth of those listeners are vulnerable to the likes of Spotify. Glass half full, it means the majority of people coming to radio are coming for something they can't get elsewhere and for a mix that is very difficult for people to replicate and to provide. Nonetheless, it is a fifth of listeners. And how can we compete with that? How can we stand toe-to-toe with the Spotifys of this world? Well, imagine we had the technology to put our radio stations on those smartphones, side by side. Imagine we were able to do that. Imagine we had millions of downloads of Irish radio apps out there to compete with Spotify. What would we do if that were the case? Well, we do. We have 2.4 million downloads of the apps of Irish radio stations sitting on phones side by side with the likes of Spotify. But what is it we are providing to listeners when they access those apps? A very old-fashioned and linear service in a very new-fashioned and modern world. We're essentially just restreaming what's already going out live. In the majority of cases, there are some exceptions. So there's a definite opportunity there. Spotify would kill you right now today to have that number of downloads. But are we giving people what they actually want that have downloaded those apps? Now, to refer back to my story at the start of the presentation, what was it that those people were talking about in that room? Well, it wasn't digital. Oh, sorry, it wasn't radio. It was about how those two things work well together. How digital and TV work well. In particular, how television drives people to search, drives people online, and drives people to purchase my clients' products. Meeting after meeting, presentation after presentation, we're seeing data like this. Basically, all you need to take away from that chart is, what the clients are taking away from that chart is, I need TV, because the more TV I spend, the more people I drive online, and therefore the more sales that I make. So much so that it has become an accepted truth with clients out there that the most important things in their plan to have is I must have TV and digital. And so despite all the panics about people fast-forwarding ads, downloading content for free, going online to Netflix, or watching Apple TV, investment in TV is staying. because of the proven correlation between it and digital and its effect on sales. Now, you might expect in advance of this presentation that I might do a little bit of homework, and I did. And I went online and searched for case studies about radio and how radio does this, and how in Ireland we should be investing in radio because it's going to drive people online. Didn't find an awful lot. I really didn't. In fact, I had to go to a study in the Netherlands. There are also some studies in the UK and RAB that shows radio and display working more efficiently than television from an impact perspective and also from an efficiency perspective because of cost. So to sum up, and if I was sitting in your seats today, we have to accept that the fight for spends has been won by digital. There's no point competing there. The job is to work with it, as many speakers have said already today. We need to look at investing, and you need to look at investing in your technology because you have the apps, but there's a lot more that can be done there. But really, what I would love to see, and if I were in your seats, I would be beating down the doors to the likes of Google and Facebook, going to them with joint research proposals for market-leading research that would show how radio is the best medium to drive people online, how radio is more efficient and works better than television to do that. I would then be coming to the agencies and to the clients and sharing that good news with them and ensuring you're on more schedules and are growing your revenue. And again, if I were in your seats and I had to do this, I would be really wishing if only I was in a market where all of those people were nearby, where I could go to the European headquarters of Google, where I could find the European headquarters of Facebook, where all of those digital people would be, that I could knock on their doors. If only I lived within a 5-minute drive of those people. Imagine what I could do. Thank you very much.